Hello, guys. Thank you so much for joining this episode where we're working on healing the mental load in your relationship. Everyone has a mental load, but sometimes there's a relationship discrepancy. Sometimes we need tips. And that's exactly what we're going for today is to give you guys some grounding practices so that you are not as stressed and you have more joy for each other. So we're doing a mini on this today, but join us over at Apple Podcast if you want a deeper dive where you're just like, I need some straight up coaching, Krista, because I'm going there with you too. But here we're doing some higher level, but also very practical work around your mental load so that you can get some quick tips and put them right into practice in a way that's compassionate and curious, not in a way that's going to make your spouse feel like you're the hero, they're the villain, and you're letting them know that they put too much mental load on you. And so we're not going to do it that way. You know this. Take a deep breath. We're going to do it a healthy way. Before we get to that, a couple of E&M announcements. One of them is this is whenever you're listening, we're recording live during Halloween, a spooky season, if you will, and we are doing a special contest. Some of you know, along with another couple, Wes and I write mystery dinner games. And so we have a creative writing prompt for you, and I'm going to share it here. And I'm also going to share one of the responses we got so you can see somebody having fun with it. But this is one kind of, like I said, higher, upper level way sometimes to reduce mental load is to get to journaling, or in this case, get to storytelling. I know my friend Amy Wicks also sometimes on her podcast, hopefully you've heard her on our podcast as well as on her own, she'll even get into just fiction writing. And so just keep in mind to have some fun with this. And if you are listening live, today is Wednesday, and tomorrow night we are going to be collecting all the responses and picking a winner for a free Mr. Dinner game and extra players kit. So you can still submit your responses. You can write to that at suppersleuths@gmail.com or even just reply to us over at E&M. So I'm going to read you, though, before we get on to mental load, I'm going to read you the story prompt that you can really just enjoy and allow yourself to fall into story with me and just enjoy this spooky story, a little bit mysterious. And if you like, you can even add to it. So, okay, here we go. Jenkins knew Miss Dana Dalwood would be coming back to the old Dalwood mansion tonight. He knew because he always timed her visits to her elderly father. And at 8:04 p.m., despite the stormy and moonless night, her old cherry red Chevrolet ambled up the sprawling tree-lined drive with regular punctuality. Jenkins had always known the comings and goings of the Dalwood family, just as he had always known that their destinies were wrapped up together. Their families had shared history for generations. Not that Miss Dana would know that, since all she seemed to care about were the property's many animals, and baffling to Jenkins, the old grouchy man Garrett Dalwood himself as well. After a while, Taylor of Villanova would be sure to show up at 9:30 p.m. or so as well, just long enough to make a pretense of care with his earnest yet sophomoric appearance, Jenkins supposed, but also briefly enough not to have to engage the batty old man before he whisked his daughter out for a night of dancing or whatever fun young people enjoyed these days. No matter, thought Jenkins, the visitors will come, but the plans are locked in. Now, this, my friends, is where your story can continue. What is Jenkins up to? How does he relate to this young Dana and her potential strange boyfriend, Taylor? And I've just left this open for you. But I do want to share, like I said, to just give you an idea of what somebody wrote back. And this is, we're also different. Every story is unique, but I just loved this entry I got. So I wanted to share it here too, because I think it's a worthy entry. So I think all entries are worthy, obviously, but you know what I mean, worthy to be shared. I just loved it so much. So have fun with it. There's no wrong or right entries, but this one was really fun. Okay, so Jenkins watched from the shadows of the old oak tree, his breath barely rising in the cold, damp air. He had been waiting for this night for months, perhaps even years, ever since he first noticed the subtle changes in the Dalwood estate's rhythms. Miss Dana had no idea of the secrets her father had kept hidden, nor did Taylor, the overconfident boyfriend, suspect the true reason behind Garrett Dalwood's hostility. The mansion had its own history, one buried under layers of dust and deceit. The truth wasn't in the animals Dana cared so tenderly for, nor in her father's cantankerous outbursts. It was in the walls themselves, and Jenkins had finally discovered it. At 9:45 p.m., when Taylor's polished sedan finally rolled up the drive, Jenkins slipped toward the mansion's side entrance. Tonight would be different. Miss Dana and her clueless companion were mere pawns, pieces moving on a board they didn't know existed. As Jenkins reached into his coat, feeling the weight of the old key he had inherited, he knew that once the clock struck 10, the Dalwood legacy would come full circle. The secret of the estate would no longer be confined to the grounds. As lightning cracked the sky, Jenkins twisted the key into the forgotten lock, and the doors creaked open, sealing the fate of all inside. Okay, I want to read that story. I want to finish that story. Whoever this was that wrote me, Umbrellas Espresso, you are awesome. I really appreciate you. You are really in the top contestant runnings. And also, I was sharing with my friend about this, and she was like, I'm in. I'm doing this contest too. So please do this contest too. I have so much fun. This is the 7 side of my brain actually letting itself go into 7 during a fun week amidst all the crazy chaos of mom life and mental overload and all the things I'm working on right with you. So this is a fun prompt. You heard my prompt. Hopefully you're on our newsletter list and saw it there. If you need it again, write to us at enneagramandmarriage.com or suppersleuths@gmail.com. Both at gmail.com, and you will go ahead and get that. Just go to the show notes. If you just I want to write, this will help my mental load to go sit for 20 minutes in the coffee shop and do this. So there you go. Step 1, mental load, Halloween week, checking that off. We also have some very cute Instagram posts for you this week. And then as a family, we have had Wes and Jack act as at the fall festival. They were Marty and Doc, which were really fun on my Facebook page. If you follow me over at Facebook, my family was really having fun with their costumes. And my kids are all we're doing Night at the Museum as a family. So I'm going to be Amelia Earhart, apparently. And I'm just looking forward to, just seeing them have fun. I am in my 40s now, so I don't need to dress up, but it is a fun thing to see. Our family is sort of known in our neighborhood circle for costuming. So I'm having fun with it. So go with your 7 sometimes, guys. Let's be expansive. Even if you're like me and you're like, oh, I want to be reading by the fireside, allow yourself that expansiveness. And that is one step toward less of a mental load. Now, let's get to our topic on actual mental load. Take another deep breath with me. Some of you may have even just pressed fast forward on this part. That's okay, because here you are. We are all ready together so that we can approach mental load together. So what is mental load? Many of you know, but I'm just going to repeat it. It's the invisible and emotional burden that includes just cognitive, almost invisible tasking, planning, emotional labor. That's the things required to keep household and family functioning smoothly. So it's the kinds of things that you don't always even notice that are stressing you out, like doing the kids' schedule, laundry. I know for me this week, we've had so much, probably the busiest weekend of last weekend of my whole fall. And it was plus the 2 to 3 hurricanes and tropical storms, but it was Friday night, we went to see Percy Jackson, then with in a theater troupe. Then we were dropping kids off for nursing home prep on Saturday. We were then taking Jack to a soccer game. Then we had a celebration of life for our church member who was deceased. Then Wes and I did have our date night. And then Sunday we were up and at 'em again. And in between there, I'm hitting Pure Barre. I'm trying to take the dog out, be the one to figure out rides, figure out who needs what. And then Sunday we kept going. We had this fun thing Melody had planned Sunday afternoon, and we also had something Sunday evening. And so it was like that fall festival. So there were so many roles to play in addition to work to be done, and hopefully Sabbath time in there as well. And you're like that too if you're in that busy parenting season of teenagers. I know you are. Some of you are like, I'm there and I have elementary kids. And some are just like, I'm just busy because I have toddlers. And others of you are like, I'm finally resting. I am not as busy. And it is wonderful. But we all know that at times in marriage, we can feel such a discrepancy with the mental load. And part of that is because statistically, and again, not punitively, just sharing statistics, there have been statistical sort of slowdowns in terms of men and women getting closer in the gap of women used to carry a bigger mental load statistically. And now it's getting to be more like 65% women, 35% men. And that is, again, a bell curve. There are men listening right now who actually carry more of a mental load. So don't think that I'm talking about you, but most of the time we still have both adults working outside of the home, and women are carrying that mental load a little bit more. So it could be a conversation of curiosity that you first just talk together together about mental load and also just see what each of your mental loads are like. And that's actually where I do recommend you starting, is not in the space of just like, oh, you know what? Men do this to women and women have more, but instead just being curious together, like, A, is this even a problem for us? And B, if it is, what can we do about it? As you guys probably remember, in my relationship, Wes, being a social type 1, has a huge mental load medically and with extended family. And so I've really worked so hard on my self-care over the years. So even though there are days and moments when I feel it, I definitely don't feel like that all the time. It's just sometimes occasionally I'll be like, okay, I feel this discrepancy. And that's when I can use these tools and tips. But for you, it might be very traditional where you're like, yeah, my husband goes to work, comes home, sits down, doesn't do anything. I go to work, I come home, and I manage anything and everything. I just happen to have an extremely social husband. So if I say, you're going to be the one to do this festival or something, he's like, oh, I already am. I'm already dressing up as Doc and Marty with my son. Like, I'm already like, he has his costume, he knows what he's doing, but he's also in a costume. Like, there are good and bad things about every single cycle. So no one has a perfect relationship in this, but we all have room to grow on the days and moments when either of us feels the mental load. And so, like I said, in my marriage, sometimes it's Wes feeling it, sometimes it's me. And that might be you guys too, where you're like, you know what? It's both of us, or it's the husband in this marriage, or it's the wife. And more often than not, it's going to be the wife, just statistically. But I always think of it this way too, because I loved that a psychologist named Elizabeth Earnshaw said that it's like that person who has to remember everything. And that is where I get it, is I am that thinking type in a relationship. So Wes has to ask me the day to day. He doesn't know the day to day, and I do. And a lot of you are like that. And I'm just going to stop saying men versus women at this point, because it might be that you're the man and you do that. But I happen to be the one who does that, where I'm the one who's like, okay, like I already know tonight I got to pick Melody up at 9:30. I know last night I had to pick her up at 9. Thursday night I have to pick her up at 9:30 along with her friend. And Wednesday, Hannah will help me and Wes if needed. And it's like, when you hear me say that, you hear me say Wes will help me, Hannah will help me, because I'm the one who's good at the planning end of things. Whereas, like I said, Wes will say that about the social end of things sometimes. So what I want you guys to do, in addition to just asking yourselves with curiosity, do we struggle with this? And do we feel a discrepancy? Is, which areas do each of us seem to be really good at? Because I'm better at planning, it doesn't usually bother me to do it. In fact, I prefer it. Whereas so many of you are like, I don't like that hanging over my head. I do, because I realize my life is complex and I have clients and I have podcasting guests and I have these children that I am helping with various projects all the time and trying to get Melody's college applications off and such. And it's a lot, and you have your a lot, but for me, I like managing and planning around that so that I know that I've got enough energy and time. As you might remember, I'm very 5-ish. So I like managing the time and knowing. And Wes likes managing the social. And when there's a social need in our community, he's like, I will take the mental load for that. In fact, right now he's meeting with another dad and him and Jack and our friend who's a mom, she's a single mom. She's like, can you guys have my son with you too? Like, they're going to have this meeting on Tuesday nights where they talk about life and God and just growing up in healthy masculinity ways. And it's going to be such a good time for them. And I feel like that's great that I don't have to carry that mental load around this part of our kids' lives. And that when I feel like Melody's busy, Hannah's busy, I'm busy, that Wes can do something like that. And that's really important for you to figure out for your family, who stewards which parts, and is it feeling fair to both? The problem I see with most couples, being completely honest, and always we know here that every one of us struggles with this fundamental attribution error. You know this word so well if you've been listening to this podcast for a while. We just think we do more. We think that we have it a little harder, and we may even rate it on a form that we've done more. But what we have to do is actually take the blinders off of I do more, they do less, I'm healthier, they're less healthy. We have to ask ourselves to check in with our partners and see, is the story I'm telling myself about this marriage and relationship true? Do they feel like they're not carrying much of a mental load? Because maybe they feel a really big, intense mental load and they're just not communicative. one of the big reasons that I'm going to be talking about on the other pod is how some of the reason that has been cited by Dr. Tracy Daglish, who we had on the podcast, and others, is the withdrawing attachment style is one of those reasons. Is sometimes people don't want to talk about their stress, but they feel a great big mental load, but they're going to go away from you versus talk about it with you. So know that you being curious around it is so important. And I'm going to get into all of those things more on the other podcast. But I just want you to know, if you're just like, this is the one I have time for, this is the one I'm signed up for, this podcast right here, remember that when you're talking about mental load, there's several aspects to check in about. And this is really kind of, these are coined by the author of Fair Play, Eve Rodsky, but it's researching, like the person who researches things, the person who remembers things like doctor's appointments, the person who's delegating things, and the person who's prioritizing and organizing special memories, as well as the person who's noticing things like toilet paper low, laundry soap low. All of this matters for the sake of it just matters. And this is part of our self-pres instinct, really, that we know that this matters because it keeps us surviving. Part of our social instinct because it keeps us prioritizing what we need to out in the world. It keeps us healthy even together. Maybe that person's also hopefully trying to get us on dates or other kinds of couples events, sexual activity as a married couple. Whoever's doing this, especially if it's just one person, allow yourselves to instead do what I said and delegate to each other what would be the parts to each of you that make the most sense. So instead of you just taking from this episode, like, okay, I have more of a mental load, ask your partner, how much mental load are you carrying? I feel like this is how I perceive it, that I seem to be the one who remembers this or that. Maybe I'm trying to be generous and say, I feel like you're the one who remembers this or that. Are we, either of us, feeling like we don't have time for our family or each other because our mental load is so high? And that, my friend, is the biggest, most difficult part, is when it gets to that level. And some of that is because of overstimulation, and we're going to be talking about that in future episodes too. But some of that is because we have dopamine addiction and we're on our phones a lot. And so we can feel like, I don't have time, but you really do. And you're finding that you're scattered because you're on your phone a lot and you need to put it in another room and use some of the episode tips we've given before for those kinds of things. But definitely allow yourself to start small new habits and give yourself reward for the new habits you're setting around this. And definitely talk it out with your spouse and your family. Because they're part of the team too. And so many of you have told me, oh, my kids won't do anything, but it's really hard, yet you are the one who has to empower them. And I get it that it feels like that's just adding one more thing to my list. But once you do pass the buck a little bit in certain areas and you do it well and you teach it right, they will get things and it will be helpful. But I know that first point is hard. So allow yourself some rest in this whole process as you're trying to shift mental load, because there is going to be some teaching in it too. And I just want to make sure you have every good thing that you need so that you're not like, I'm burning out even more now that I'm trying to share the load. I do think that'll happen a little bit just because that's life. Sometimes when we're trying to teach others what we're doing and we're offloading something, we're like, my brain is so maxed out, it's even hard to teach you. I'm glitching even in the teaching. But so take your deep breaths, take your 5-minute micro naps, take your little date nights together, take your time getting your fitness, your walks, whatever it is to give you that reboot. Eat your healthy foods, get your sleep. These things will clean your brain and help you to be able to figure out who needs to do what, how to share the load well. And also just make sure you take one thing from today's episode specifically, whether it be, I'm going to find a really good time when my partner and I are both not tired. We're going to talk this out and see how our mental loads are doing. Or maybe it's, yep, you got me. I do have a huge mental load. I seem to be the one doing most things, but I'm going to check it out with my partner and just see, even the language we're using, like what do we each like doing? How can we share? And how can we start telling healthy stories and living out healthy stories together? Or maybe it's just, you're just having fun with me and you're like, I'm going to do that story prompt you gave me earlier so that I can just have some fun with that. So go back to that if that's what you need. And definitely either way, take a nice big deep breath with me. You did a great job on our midweek episode. I hope you have such a fun spooky season / Halloween, bringing light to the darkness, and I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye.